Thanks everyone for coming to our presentation. We are here to speak about neoliberalism, globalization, responsible decision making, and connect the dots between all three. Everyone might be wondering what neoliberalism is. To put it in simpler words, neoliberalism is stripping away reform policies that are in place and handing the responsibility to individuals or parties involved within the reform policies. How does globalization relate to neoliberalism? The dominant form of globalization is neoliberal globalization. These neoliberal policies aim at creating a framework for the economy that makes it possible to raise profits by minimizing the costs of investment, reducing social security, and reaching individualism. Now, we will look at the definition of responsible leadership. Responsible leadership can be defined as a value based and thorough ethical, principles driven relationship of leaders and stakeholders. Responsible leaders must ensure that the stakeholders of their organizations are linked by a purpose and shared meaning. In an ideal world, neoliberalism looks great. But do you think the individuals or parties preaching the individualism will hold responsibility to the actions they take? Now, we will look at the decisions made by two world leaders to understand whether they had a positive or a recoiling effect for the stakeholders.
Thank you, Nishwant. The Paris Accord is a legally binding international treaty on climate change, adopted by 189 countries with the goal to limit global warming below 2 degrees Celsius. However, following Donald Trump's announcement in 2017, on November 4th, 2020, the US formally withdrew from the Paris Accord. In a rapidly globalizing economy, the Trump administration believed America had been severely disadvantaged at the hands of international environmental regulations, resulting in increased economic competition and unemployment. This pushed Trump towards a more neoliberalist ideology, whereby deregulation within the context of the environment would be implemented to make way for a free market. Here, all individuals would be free to make their own choices, whether that includes working for industries which contribute to environmental pollution or buying goods and services from businesses which do the same. In essence, all decisions revolving around compliance with international environmental regulations were left to the individual or private collective, but in no way were to be imposed by the state. As a result, in line with this ideology, the Trump administration decided to pull out of the Paris Agreement in order to remain competitive, bring back jobs, and save taxpayer money, amongst other reasons. Now, I'll be passing it over to Crystal, who will talk about the stakeholders involved, which will give us a better understanding of who, as decision makers, we must be responsible to.
Thanks, Ahmad. Now that we have a brief understanding of what happened, let's further unpack and look at who we are responsible for, as well who is Trump responsible for. So two views can be taken. Overall, Trump's rationale for leaving the Paris Accord was to provide more jobs as well as to further boost the US economy. However, on the other hand, leaving the Paris Accord is detrimental not only to the environment, but to other countries as well. So this raises an important question. Who are country leaders responsible for? Should they be responsible to their country first, or should they focus on the bigger picture? So let's analyze and understand which stakeholders would benefit from America leaving the Paris Agreement. Firstly, the coal miners in America. Trump promised to revitalize the coal industry, which he claimed had been hampered by environmental regulations. He claimed that this agreement would cost upwards to US $3.5 trillion in lost GDP, as well as 6.5 million jobs. US taxpayers will also benefit, as the requirement for the Paris Treaty for developed nations such as the US is to make large annual contributions to the fund. Now let's look at the other side. Which stakeholders would benefit from America staying in the Paris Agreement? The first and most obvious is the environment. If the US withdraws, that would make it more difficult for the world to reach its goals that it set for itself in the Paris Agreement. As well, other countries within the agreement would also suffer, as the US leaving the agreement will put more pressure on these countries to reduce their emissions. Finally, let's look at the developing countries. Refusal to US to contribute to climate aid will make it more difficult for these countries to mitigate and adapt to climate change, thus imposing a larger burden on them. And is this fair? Here is a quote from Trump regarding the Paris Agreement. I want to focus in on the first line. As president, I have one obligation, and that obligation is to the American people. From this quote, it is clear who Trump thinks he is responsible for. He further goes on to say that no responsible leader can put the workers and the people of their country at this debilitating and tremendous disadvantage. It is true that country leaders have the duty and responsibility to lead their own people. However, I want to leave you with this final question. How can country leaders better balance responsibility towards their own country as well as to the rest of the world? I will now pass it off to Vera, who will talk about the Amazon forest fires in Brazil.
Thanks, Crystal. We would like now to briefly introduce you to the second headline of our interest, which is related to loosening environmental restrictions in Brazil by its own government. Mr. Bolsonaro, conservative Brazilian president, cut the main environmental enforcement IBAMA agency's budget by 24%, part of a broader cost savings across the government, and the agency handed out 20% fewer fines in 2020 as the government rolls back conservation efforts and Amazon deforestation skyrockets. Moreover, Brazilian Environment Minister Ricardo Salles announced an end to two legal protections for mangrovers and coastal Restinga forests by claiming they were excessively restrictive for such a stifled economic development as the country has now. Minister highlights that Brazil should take advantage of the media's preoccupation with the pandemic COVID-19 and push through and change all the rules and simplify norms. So, from the neoliberalism perspective, we observe the situation when the government of Brazil tends to develop country's economy, but at what cost? If we look at it globally, various stakeholders are involved here. So, who is Brazilian government really responsible to? And now I will pass to Alessandra, who will address this question.
Thanks, Vera. Similar to the first headline that we discussed, Brazil's President Jair Bolsonaro faced a similar dilemma with who he should be responsible to when he was first elected into office in 2019. He was then quoted a few months later saying that you have to understand that the Amazon is Brazil's, not yours, indicating that he has chosen to place his own self-interest and that of Brazil's above others. He rose to office by promising to open the Amazon for business and decrease the size of Brazil's government with the ultimate goal of growing their economy. His platform quickly gained popularity among Brazilians from all socioeconomic statuses. By meeting the expectations of the Brazilian people to bring jobs and grow the economy, Bolsonaro's actions show that he is responsible to his people first. He also personally benefits by extending his political career, showing that he is responsible to himself and to supporting his family. Now let's talk about the economy. The combination of less budget for important regulatory and environmental agencies with the greater opportunity for land development in Brazil leaves Brazil's major industries with a huge position to profit from these neoliberal actions. Brazil's major economic industries include mining, soy production, and animal products. In fact, Brazil is the world's largest exporter of beef, and this industry has particular relevance to the loosening of environmental restrictions, as it's common practice for farmers in this industry to set fires to parts of the Amazon forest in order to clear land for cattle raising or for soy feed. In 2019, the same year as the new government took power, there was a 55% increase in deforestation in the Amazon compared to the prior year. This marks the highest level in over a decade. This shows that with less government oversight, these resource-based industries are able to take liberties in their operations and engage in harmful practices with little repercussions. For these industry players, they're clearly prioritizing their bottom lines by taking actions that prioritize profit. Now Vera will talk about who suffers as a result of these actions.
Thanks, Alessandra. Of course, we can't but mention the other important stakeholder, which we refer to as global citizens. What is really important to highlight in this case is global implications of such loosening Brazilian environmental restrictions, as it directly influences the whole world by fostering global warming process. Brazil is home to 60% of the Amazon rainforest, but what is more important is ability of Amazon to provide 20% of the world's oxygen and absorb 5% of the world's carbon emissions, which is basically 2 billion tons. Here, we speak about the most far-going long-term consequences of actions of Brazilian government, which are probably the most valuable ones. And I will pass to Hamad, who will draw up the conclusion.
Thank you, Vera. As humans, we often tend to favor short-term solutions over the long term, even when this is illogical. Same applies in areas of leadership, such as for politicians who often think only as far ahead as the next election. Therefore, when it comes to the decision of who we must be responsible to, leaders must be cognizant of the various stakeholders that exist and contribute to the multiple bottom lines of economic, social, and environmental performance. However, while doing so, it is imperative that all decisions taken must be taken through a long-term lens to ensure a sustainable future. That leaves us with just one question. Who are you responsible to? Thank you for watching our presentation.